The mud is cold beneath Hester's body. She lies curled on her side in the pig pen, one hand pressed protectively over her swollen belly, the other clutching the wooden slats for balance. The animals shift around her, grunting, indifferent. The stench is suffocating. Manure, rot, wet earth. From inside the house, she hears laughter. Her husband's voice rises above the others. Loud, confident, performing. He's entertaining guests again. Friends from town. Neighbors who know exactly where she is but say nothing. Hester closes her eyes and whispers to the child inside her. Just a little longer. Please, just hold on. Her dress, once burgundy, now stained brown, clings to her skin. Her braids are matted with filth. She hasn't bathed in days. He won't let her inside until she learns respect. She doesn't know what that means anymore. A pig nudges her leg. She doesn't move. Then she hears it. The crunch of tires on gravel. Engines idling. Low voices in a language she hasn't heard in years. Hester's breath catches. Something is wrong. Or maybe something is about to change. The voices fade. The tires crunch away. Hester realizes whoever they were, they didn't stop. They passed by. She exhales slowly, forcing her heartbeat to settle. False hope is dangerous. She's learned that the hard way. The pig nearest to her, a fat sow with pink-streaked skin, lowers its snout and sniffs at Hester's arm. She doesn't flinch. At first, the animals terrified her. Their size, their teeth, the way they circled her at night like she was something they might consume. But after weeks of sleeping among them, she's learned they're just curious, hungry, indifferent to her suffering in a way that almost feels like mercy. At least they don't pretend to care. Hester shifts her weight, trying to ease the pressure on her lower back. The baby kicks, hard, insistent, and she winces. Her hand moves instinctively to the spot, pressing gently as if she could soothe the child through her skin. "I know," she whispers. "I know you hate it here too." The laughter inside the house grows louder. She recognizes the voices now. Pastor Kamani and his wife, the village chief, a few of the farmhands her husband keeps on payroll. They're drinking, celebrating something. She doesn't know what. She stopped asking questions months ago. Her husband. She can't bring herself to say his name anymore, not even in her own mind. Appears at the window. He's shirtless, his muscular frame silhouetted against the warm light spilling from inside. He sees her. She knows he does, but he doesn't acknowledge her. He just laughs at something someone said, takes a long drink from his bottle, and turns away. Hester looks down at her hands. They're shaking. She used to have beautiful hands. Soft, manicured. She remembers the way her mother would hold them when she was young, tracing the lines of her palms and telling her she had the hands of someone destined for gentleness. Someone who would hold babies and bake bread and plant flowers. Now her nails are cracked and caked with dirt. Her knuckles are raw from scrubbing floors and hauling water and clawing at the fence the one time she tried to climb out. He caught her before she made it over, dragged her back by her hair, told her if she ever tried again, he'd make sure she lost more than her dignity. She believed him. The baby kicks again, this time lower, sharper. Hester gasps, clutching her belly with both hands. The pain radiates through her hips, down her thighs. It's been happening more often lately. False contractions, maybe, or maybe something worse. She doesn't know. She hasn't seen a doctor since the first trimester, back when he still pretended to care. "Not yet," she whispers fiercely, her voice breaking. "Please, baby, not yet, not here." Because if she goes into labor in this pen, surrounded by filth and animals and no help, she knows what will happen. She's seen it before growing up in the countryside. Women who gave birth alone. Women whose bodies couldn't handle it. Women who bled out in silence while the world moved on without them. She will not let that be her story. She will not let that be her child's beginning. Hester presses her forehead against the wooden slat, closing her eyes. She tries to remember what it felt like to be clean, to be warm, to be treated like a human being. It's getting harder. The door to the house swings open, and her husband steps out onto the porch. He's still shirtless, his skin gleaming with sweat under the dim outdoor light. He lights a cigarette, takes a long drag, and finally looks at her. "You still awake?" he calls out, his voice casual, almost amused. Hester doesn't answer. She's learned that silence is safer. He walks toward the pen, boots crunching on the dry grass. When he reaches the fence, he leans against it, smoking lazily, studying her like she's something he owns but hasn't decided what to do with yet. "Pastor Kamani asked about you," he says. "Wanted to know why you weren't inside." Hester's throat tightens. She keeps her eyes down. "I told him you were feeling unwell, that you preferred the fresh air." He laughs short, sharp. "He believed me. They always do." She digs her nails into her palms, forcing herself to stay still. "You know what your problem is?" he continues, flicking ash through the slats. "You don't know how good you have it. Roof over your head. Food when I decide you've earned it. A man willing to tolerate your disrespect." Hester's jaw clenches. She wants to scream. She wants to tell him that this pen, this humiliation, this slow erasure of everything she used to be, is not mercy. This cruelty dressed up as discipline. But she doesn't, because the last time she spoke back, he didn't let her eat for 3 days. And she has more than herself to think about now. He finishes his cigarette and flicks the butt into the pen. It lands near her foot, still smoldering. "Get some sleep," he says, turning away. "You'll need your strength tomorrow. Lots of work to do." He walks back toward the house, and the door slams shut behind him. Hester waits until she's sure he's gone. Then she picks up the cigarette butt and crushes it into the mud. She lies back down, curling around her belly, and starts counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a trick she learned as a child. When things got bad, when her father's world became too loud, too violent, too unpredictable, her mother would tell her to count, to focus on something small and controllable until the chaos passed. 5, 6, 7, 8. She counts her breaths. She counts the baby's kicks. She counts the hours until dawn when maybe, he'll let her inside to wash her face and drink clean water. 9, 10, 11, 12. And then she stops, because she hears it again. The sound of tires on gravel. Closer this time. Slower. Hester sits up, heart pounding, and peers through the slats. 3 black SUVs roll to a stop just outside the compound. The engines cut off. The headlights stay on. No one gets out. Not yet. Hester's breath comes fast and shallow. She doesn't know who they are. She doesn't know what they want. But something deep in her chest, something she thought had died months ago, flickers to life. Hope. Or maybe it's just fear wearing a different face. Either way, she can't look away. The SUVs sit in silence, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Hester watches, hardly daring to breathe. Minutes pass. Nothing moves. Then, as quietly as they arrived, the engines restart and the vehicles roll away, disappearing down the dirt road. Hester slumps against the fence, disappointment flooding through her so intensely it feels like nausea. She doesn't know what she expected. Rescue doesn't come to women like her. Women who made the wrong choice. Women who ignored every warning sign until it was too late. She thinks about the first time she saw him. It was at a market in Nairobi 3 years ago. She'd been buying vegetables for the small apartment she shared with 2 other girls, trying to stretch her modest savings as far as they would go. She'd left home young. Too young, probably. Desperate to escape the suffocating weight of a life she didn't understand and a father whose business she wasn't supposed to know about. He was standing by a fruit stall, laughing with the vendor. His smile so warm and genuine it made something in her chest loosen. When he caught her staring, he didn't look away. He walked over, introduced himself, and offered to carry her bags. She should have said no. But he had kind eyes. Or at least she thought they were kind. He talked about his dreams of owning land, of building something real with his own hands, of finding a woman who understood the value of hard work and family. He didn't ask about her past. He didn't push. He just showed up, day after day, with that same easy smile, until spending time with him felt like breathing. When he proposed 6 months later, she said yes without hesitation. She told herself she was lucky, that she'd found someone who wanted her for herself, not for the name she'd spent years running from. The wedding was small. She didn't invite anyone from her old life. He said his family would be her family now, and that sounded like freedom. It wasn't. The first few months were sweet. He'd wake her with tea and kisses, pull her close at night and whisper about the children they'd have, the life they'd build. He bought her small gifts, a bracelet, a new dress, flowers from the roadside. He called her his queen, his heart, his everything. But there were moments, small ones at first. The way his jaw would tighten when she mentioned wanting to work. The silence that would settle over him when she talked about visiting friends. The questions about where she'd been, who she'd spoken to, why she'd taken so long at the market. She told herself he was protective, that he cared. Then came the first rule. He didn't call it that, of course. He framed it as concern. He said the city wasn't safe for a woman alone, that she should stay home unless he was with her. That he'd handle the shopping, the errands, the outside world. She could focus on making their house a home. She agreed. It seemed reasonable. The second rule came a month later. She'd been on the phone with one of her old roommates when he walked in. He didn't raise his voice. He just took the phone from her hand, ended the call, and explained, calmly, rationally, that her past was behind her now. That those friendships would only pull her backward. That she needed to focus on their future, not on people who didn't understand what they were building together. She cried that night. He held her, stroked her hair, and promised he was doing this because he loved her. Because he wanted to protect her from people who might hurt her or lead her astray. She believed him. The third rule, the fourth, the fifth. They accumulated so gradually she didn't notice the cage forming around her until the door had already locked. Don't wear that dress, it's too revealing. Don't smile at the shopkeeper. It's disrespectful to me. Don't question where the money goes, that's my responsibility. Don't raise your voice, that's not how a good wife behaves. Don't leave the house without permission. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't. By the time she realized what was happening, she had nowhere to go. He'd moved them to this rural compound 6 months into the marriage. Far from the city, far from anyone she knew. He controlled the money, the transportation, the phone. Her world shrank to the size of their property, and even that space wasn't truly hers. The first time he hit her, she was 4 months pregnant. She'd burned the ugali. It was an accident. She'd been feeling nauseous all day, struggling to keep food down, and she'd lost track of time. When he came in and saw the blackened pot, his face went blank. Not angry, just empty. He walked over, took the pot from the stove, and threw it across the room. Then he grabbed her by the arm and shook her so hard her teeth rattled. Do you think I work all day so you can waste food? His voice was quiet, controlled. Somehow that made it worse. Do you think I married you so you could be lazy and useless? She tried to apologize, but he slapped her. Not hard enough to leave a visible mark. Just hard enough to shock her into silence. Then he walked out, got into his truck, and didn't come back until the next morning. When he returned, he brought her flowers. He apologized. He said he'd been stressed about money, that he shouldn't have reacted that way, that it would never happen again. She wanted to believe him. It happened again 2 weeks later. And then again. And again. Each time he'd apologize. Each time he'd blame something external, work stress, money problems, her behavior. Each time she'd convince herself it was temporary. That if she just tried harder, did better, said less, he'd go back to being the man she married. But that man never existed. She knows that now. The man she married was a performance. A mask worn long enough to trap her, and then discarded once escape became impossible. The baby kicks, pulling her back to the present. Hester shifts in the mud, trying to find a position that doesn't make her back scream. She wonders if her daughter, she's certain it's a daughter, though she has no real way of knowing, will remember this. If somehow, even in the womb, the child is absorbing this suffering, learning that love looks like cruelty and silence is survival. She can't let that happen. She won't. Inside the house, the guests are finally leaving. She hears car doors slamming, engines starting, voices calling out goodbyes. The compound falls quiet again. Her husband will come out soon. He always does after guests leave, drunk enough to be unpredictable, sober enough to be calculated. Hester closes her eyes and counts again. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counts the days since she last felt safe. The months since she last laughed. The years since she last heard her real name spoken aloud by someone who knew where she came from. 5, 6, 7, 8. She counts the promises she made to herself that she's already broken. The boundaries she swore she'd hold that she let him cross. The version of herself she used to be, now so distant she can barely remember her face. 9, 10, 11, 12. And then she stops counting. Because the black SUVs are back. This time they don't leave. This time the doors open. Men step out. 5, maybe 6, dressed in dark clothing that blends with the night. They move with precision, fanning out across the compound information. One of them speaks into a radio in a language Hester doesn't immediately recognize, though something about the cadence tugs at a memory she spent years trying to bury. Her husband emerges from the house, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He's still drunk, still shirtless, but even through the haze of alcohol she can see the shift in his posture when he registers what's happening. His swagger falters, his shoulders tense. "Can I help you?" he calls out, his voice carrying that forced joviality he uses when he's threatened but trying not to show it. The men don't answer. One of them points toward the pig pen. Another pulls out a flashlight. Hester's heart hammers against her ribs. She doesn't know whether to hope or hide. Before she can decide, her husband is walking toward the pen, moving faster now, positioning himself between the strangers and her. For a moment, just a flash, she wonders if he's protecting her. If some part of the man she thought she married might still exist. Then he speaks. She's fine, just being dramatic as usual. Women, you know how they are when they're pregnant. He laughs, but it sounds hollow. She insisted on sleeping out here, said the house was too hot. I tried to tell her. One of the men raises a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. The silence that follows is absolute. Hester has learned to read silence. She's become fluent in it over the past year, the way prisoners learn to interpret the footsteps of their guards. This silence isn't empty. It's loaded, dangerous. The man with the flashlight approaches the pen. The beam catches Hester's face, and she squints against the brightness. She wants to look away, to hide the evidence of what she's become, but something stops her. Some stubborn part of her that refuses to feel shame for crimes she didn't commit. The man's face changes. His jaw tightens. He says something sharp in that same unfamiliar language, and the others converge on the pen. Her husband starts talking faster now, his words tripping over each other. Listen, I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing, but this is my property. That's my wife. You have no right. Your wife. The words come from behind him, spoken in English so clean and cold it could cut glass. Hester's husband spins around. A seventh man has emerged from the lead vehicle, older than the others, impeccably dressed despite the late hour, moving with the kind of authority that doesn't need to announce itself. Something about him makes Hester's breath catch. Not fear. Recognition, though she can't place from where. Yes, her husband says, drawing himself up to his full height. My wife. And I don't appreciate strangers showing up at my home in the middle of the night, shining lights at her, making her uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. The older man repeats the word like he's tasting it, testing its weight. He looks at Hester, really looks at her, and something flickers across his face too quickly for her to read. Is that what you call this? Hester's husband follows his gaze to the pen, seeming to see it for the first time through someone else's eyes. The mud, the animals, the pregnant woman curled in the filth. For just a second, his confidence wavers. But he recovers quickly. He always does. You don't understand our culture, he says, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he uses when he's explaining why things have to be the way they are. This is discipline. This is how we teach respect in our community. The elders approve. The pastor knows. Everyone understands that a man has to maintain order in his home. It's true. They do understand. Or at least they pretend to. Hester has watched the community justify her suffering with the same practiced ease her husband uses to inflict it. When she showed up to church with a black eye, the pastor's wife pulled her aside and asked what she'd done to provoke him. When a neighbor saw her husband drag her across the yard by her hair, he turned and walked the other way. When the village chief came for dinner and found her locked outside, he laughed and told her husband he was lucky to have a woman who knew her place. They all knew. They all saw. They all chose silence. Because challenging him would mean challenging the structures that benefit them too. The belief that a man's home is his kingdom, that a woman's pain is private business, that questioning cruelty makes you complicit in disorder. So they wrapped her suffering in tradition and called it discipline. They watched her shrink and called it respect. They heard her silence and called it acceptance. And Hester learned that screaming into a void that refuses to hear you is just another way of breaking your own heart. So she stopped screaming. She learned to lower her eyes when Pastor Kamani visited, to smile when the neighbors asked how she was, to say, "I'm fine," in a voice so flat it couldn't possibly be mistaken for truth. She learned that survival sometimes means becoming smaller, quieter, less visible until you're barely there at all. She learned to count her punishments like prayer beads, cataloging each one so she wouldn't forget she was human even as they treated her like property. The time he locked her in the storage shed for 2 days because she asked where their savings had gone. The time he made her kneel on rice for 3 hours because she forgot to iron his shirt. The time he destroyed all her photographs, the only images she had of her mother, because she was living in the past instead of focusing on her duties. Each punishment came with a lesson. Each lesson came with a witness who saw and said nothing. Each silence drove her further into herself, until the woman she used to be felt like a story someone else had told her once, in another lifetime. The baby became her only tether to the belief that she mattered, that someone somewhere needed her to survive. So she swallowed her voice and her pride and her rage, and she endured. But endurance has a cost. She can feel it now, the hollow place where her hope used to live, the numbness spreading through her chest like frost, the way her mind has started to fracture under the weight of sustained cruelty. She catches herself having conversations with people who aren't there. She loses time, blinking awake to find hours have passed without her noticing. She forgets what day it is, what month, sometimes even what year. She's collapsing inward, imploding, becoming the ghost he's always treated her as. And the worst part, the part that terrifies her more than his fists or his words or his systematic destruction of everything she used to be, is that some days she forgets to fight it. Some days, she looks at her reflection in the water trough and doesn't recognize the woman staring back, and she thinks, maybe he's right. Maybe this is all I deserve. Maybe I did something to earn this. Maybe I'm not worthy of anything better. Those are the days that scare her most, because she knows intellectually that thinking this way means he's winning, that internalizing his cruelty is exactly what he wants, that believing his lies about her worth is the final stage of her erasure. But knowing doesn't stop the thoughts from coming. The older man is still staring at her husband, his expression unreadable. When he finally speaks again, his voice is quieter, but somehow more dangerous for it. Your community, he says slowly, is about to learn what happens when discipline becomes torture, when authority becomes tyranny, when a man mistakes his wife's silence for consent instead of recognizing it for what it truly is. And what's that? Her husband challenges, though his voice has lost its edge. The older man's eyes are black ice. Survival. The word hangs in the air between them like a blade. Her husband opens his mouth to respond, but before he can, Hester doubles over. Pain, sharp and sudden, rips through her abdomen like something tearing. She gasps, clutching her belly with both hands, and the world tilts sideways. The older man barks an order in that language she almost recognizes, and suddenly there are hands reaching through the fence slats, voices speaking rapidly, someone fumbling with the gate lock. But Hester barely registers any of it. All she knows is pain, waves of it, crashing through her body in rhythms that feel both foreign and terrifyingly familiar. Her legs give out and she collapses into the mud, curling around her stomach, trying to protect the life inside her even as her own body seems determined to expel it. Not now. Please, not now. This isn't the first time. 3 days ago, she woke before dawn to cramping so severe she couldn't stand. She'd pressed her back against the fence and breathed through it, counting seconds between contractions that eventually faded into dull aches. False labor, probably. Her body practicing for something it might not survive. Yesterday, the pain came back stronger. Sharp stabs that radiated from her pelvis down through her thighs, accompanied by pressure so intense she felt like she might split open. She'd managed to crawl to the water trough the animals drink from and splash lukewarm water on her face, whispering promises to the baby that everything would be fine, even though she knew it was a lie. She hasn't eaten a full meal in 4 days. Her husband brings her scraps when he remembers. Half a chapati, cold beans, once a bruised mango that she devoured so quickly she made herself sick. The dehydration is worse. Her lips are cracked and bleeding. Her urine is dark amber when it comes at all. Her head swims every time she tries to stand. Her body is shutting down. She knows this. She can feel it in the way her thoughts scatter like startled birds, in the tremor in her hands that won't stop, in the way her heart races even when she's lying still. And now this pain that feels different from the false contractions. Deeper, more insistent. Please, she whispers to her belly, tears streaming down her filthy cheeks. Please hold on. Just a little longer. I know it's bad. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But please, baby. Please don't come yet. Not here. Not like this. Through the haze of pain, she hears her husband's voice rising in pitch, growing defensive. He's explaining something to the men, gesturing, his words coming faster. But she can't focus on what he's saying because another contraction is building, tightening around her middle like a fist. She tastes copper. Blood. She's bitten through her lip. The gate finally swings open and men in dark suits pour in, but they stop short when they see her properly. One of them, young, barely more than a boy, turns away and vomits. Another pulls out his phone, speaking urgently into it. The older man crouches beside her, his expensive shoes sinking into the mud without hesitation. He doesn't touch her, just looks at her with an expression she can't decipher. How long? He asks quietly. Hester doesn't understand the question. How long has she been in pain? How long has she been pregnant? How long has she been living like this? How long have you been bleeding? She looks down. There's blood on her dress, dark against the burgundy fabric. Fresh. She hadn't noticed. I don't know, she manages. I can't. He's already standing, already issuing orders. Someone drapes a jacket over her shoulders. Someone else is calling for a medic. Her husband is still talking, still trying to control the narrative, but nobody's listening to him anymore. The pain subsides enough for Hester to think clearly for a moment. She needs to remember this. The moment when someone finally looked at her and saw a human being in crisis instead of a woman who deserved what she got. She wants to remember, but the fever is climbing. She can feel it burning through her blood, turning her thoughts to smoke. Infection, maybe, from the filth she's been living in, from the untreated wounds on her hands and knees, from the sheer accumulated damage of months of degradation. A face appears in her swimming vision. Small, young. The neighbor's daughter, maybe 8 years old, is peering through the fence where the men haven't blocked the view. The girl's eyes are enormous, reflecting horror and something else. Recognition, perhaps. The understanding that what's happening to Hester could happen to anyone. Their eyes meet. The girl's hand comes up to her mouth. Hester tries to smile, to somehow communicate that it's not the child's fault for watching, for not helping, for learning too young that sometimes survival means looking away. But the girl doesn't look away. She stands there, bearing witness, even as her mother appears and tries to pull her back toward their house. The girl plants her feet and refuses to move, and Hester thinks maybe that's enough. Maybe one person refusing to pretend they don't see is enough to prove she's not invisible. The pain is building again. Hester grips the older man's arm without thinking, her fingers digging into expensive fabric. My baby, she gasps. Please, whatever happens to me, please save my baby. He covers her hand with his own. We'll save you both. But Hester knows promises made in crisis are just prayers dressed in certainty. She's learned not to trust them. The next several hours blur together in fragments. There's a stretcher, bright lights, voices arguing, her husband insisting he should come, someone else telling him firmly that he will not. The back of an ambulance or maybe one of those SUVs. Someone checking her pulse, her blood pressure, muttering numbers that sound bad even to her untrained ear. She drifts in and out, surfacing occasionally to hear pieces of conversation. 7 months, malnutrition, possible placental abruption, need to stabilize. How long was she? Jesus Christ. In a pig pen. Get me the father. No, not him. The real father. Her hand finds her belly again, feeling for movement. The baby kicks weakly, and relief floods through her so intensely she sobs. Still alive. Still fighting. Like mother, like daughter. Hester lets her eyes close, lets the fever pull her under. But just before consciousness slips away completely, a memory surfaces. Sharp and clear as broken glass. 2 days ago? Or was it 3? Time has lost meaning. But recently, when the pain had been bad and her husband had been gone somewhere, leaving her locked in the pen with no water and no shade, she'd managed to find a scrap of paper that had blown in from somewhere, and a stub of pencil one of the pigs had been chewing on. Her hands had shaken so badly she could barely form letters, but she'd written it anyway. A message. A plea. My name is Hester. I am 7 months pregnant. I am being kept in a pig pen. I need help. Please. She'd addressed it to a clinic she remembered from years ago, when she'd still been free to walk through Nairobi's streets alone. She didn't know if they'd moved, if they even existed anymore, if the address she half remembered was correct. But she'd written it anyway, because doing nothing was no longer survivable. The next morning, when her husband had left for work, she'd tried. God, she'd tried. She'd gripped the fence with trembling fingers and pulled herself up, 1 agonizing inch at a time. Her pregnant belly made it nearly impossible to balance. Her weakened muscles screamed in protest. But she'd kept climbing because the alternative was staying, and staying meant dying slowly enough to watch it happen. She'd almost made it. Her leg was over the top rail when her strength gave out completely. She'd fallen backward, landing hard in the mud, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. She'd lain there gasping, tasting blood and failure, one hand still clutching the letter. Thomas, one of the farmhands, had found her. He'd stood there for a long moment, looking at her sprawled in the filth, and she'd seen it on his face, the war between his conscience and his cowardice. His conscience lost. He'd simply waited, arms crossed, until her husband's truck rumbled back up the drive. Her husband had read the letter aloud, his voice dripping with mockery. My name is Hester. I need help. Please. He'd laughed. You think anyone cares? You think anyone's coming for you? Then he'd held the paper to his lighter and let it burn, dropping the flaming scraps at her feet. No one is coming for you, he'd repeated. No one cares. But he'd been wrong, because here they are. The black SUVs. The men who move like soldiers. The older man who looked at her suffering and called it what it was. Hester holds onto that thought as the darkness pulls her deeper. She tried to save herself, and maybe that was enough to set everything else in motion. Maybe resistance, even when it fails, sends ripples through the universe. Maybe every act of defiance, no matter how small, matters in ways we can't predict. Or maybe she's just delirious with fever and pain, inventing meaning where there's only chaos. Either way, she crossed a line. She stopped accepting her fate as inevitable. And somewhere in the gap between accepting and resisting, between enduring and fighting back, she became someone she'd almost forgotten existed. She became Hester again. Not his wife. Not his property. Not the ghost he tried to make her. Just Hester. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Hester wakes in increments. First, sound. The low hum of an engine. Tires on pavement. Voices speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Then sensation. Soft fabric beneath her instead of mud. Something clean covering her body. The gentle rock of movement. Finally, sight, the interior of a vehicle, medical equipment, and 4-line running into her arm. She's in an ambulance. No, too luxurious. Private medical transport. A medic sits beside her, monitoring something on a screen. When he notices her eyes open, he leans forward. Stay still, he says in accented English. Your vitals are stabilizing, but you need to rest. Hester tries to speak, but her throat is sandpaper. He holds a bottle of water to her lips and she drinks greedily, some primal part of her brain screaming that she needs to hoard it, to save some for later, because she doesn't know when she'll get more. Slow, the medic instructs gently. Small sips. The baby. She needs to know about the baby. Her hand flies to her stomach, and the medic catches it. The baby is stable, he assures her. Heartbeat is strong, but you both need hospital care immediately. Relief makes her dizzy. Or maybe that's the dehydration, or the infection, or the accumulated trauma of months of systematic destruction. Through the tinted window, she sees dawn breaking over Nairobi's skyline. They're heading back toward the city. Away from the compound. Away from him. The reality hits her then, sharp and disorienting. She's free. Or at least she's away. Whether those are the same thing remains to be seen. The vehicle slows and Hester tenses. They're stopping. Why are they stopping? Is he here? Did he follow? Is he gonna drag her back and... We're switching vehicles. The medic explains, reading her panic. More secure transport for the remainder of the journey. The door opens and Hester flinches, but it's only more men in dark suits. They move with military efficiency, transferring her stretcher from one vehicle to another. In the brief moment between vehicles, she sees them clearly. 3 black SUVs just like she remembers, but also dozens of men, forming a perimeter, eyes scanning the street with the kind of vigilance that suggests they're expecting trouble, anticipating it, maybe even hoping for it. This isn't a rescue, it's an extraction. The older man from before appears at her side as they settle her into the new vehicle. In the morning light, she can see him properly. Late 50s, maybe early 60s. Silver threading through his dark hair. Sharp, intelligent eyes. Expensive suit that looks out of place in this context but somehow fits him perfectly. He looks at her like he's trying to memorize her face. "You're safe now," he says. But there's something in his voice. Not quite relief. Grief, maybe. Or guilt. Hester stares at him, really seeing him for the first time. Something about his face is familiar in a way that makes her chest ache. The shape of his jaw. The set of his eyes. Features she sees in her own reflection, when she can bear to look. "Who are you?" she asks, though part of her already knows. He settles into the seat across from her stretcher, hands folded carefully in his lap. When he speaks, his voice is steady, but she can hear the emotion underneath, tightly controlled. "My name is Ethan Sang," he says. "I am your father." The words should feel like revelation, like the missing piece clicking into place. Instead, they feel like vertigo. Hester's mind races backward, shuffling through fractured memories. Her childhood in Seoul until she was 7. The sudden move to Kenya. Her mother's tight-lipped refusal to discuss the past. The hushed phone calls in Korean that would stop abruptly when Hester entered the room. The way her mother would sometimes look at her with such profound sadness, as if Hester's very existence was a wound that wouldn't heal. Her mother had died when Hester was 17. Cancer, they'd said, but looking back now, Hester wonders if it was something else. Something slower, the accumulated weight of secrets and fear. After the funeral, Hester had found documents hidden in her mother's belongings. A fake passport, cash in multiple currencies, phone numbers with no names attached. She'd been too young to understand what it meant, too consumed by grief to ask questions. So she'd run, changed her name, reinvented herself, become someone with no past, no ties, no dangerous history. She thought she'd escaped. "You've been missing for 3 years. Ethan continues, his accent more pronounced now that he's speaking longer sentences. "We've been searching. I've had people looking for you in every city in East Africa. 3 years. That's how long she's been married. How long she's been trying to be invisible." Hester's throat tightens. "My mother protected you," Ethan says simply. "From my world. From people who would have used you as leverage against me. She took you and disappeared so completely it took me 5 years just to find out which continent you were on. The pieces are falling into place, but they form a picture Hester doesn't want to see. She can't say it, can't give voice to what she suspected since she heard him speak Korean to his men with the kind of authority that doesn't come from legitimate business. "I am," he confirms, not making her finish. "And because of what I am, your mother believed you'd be safer if I never found you." She was probably right. Hester processes this. Her mother fled from this man, hid her from him, died still keeping the secret of where they were. And now here he is. Not her rescuer, her jailer with a different face. "I don't want to be found," she says, her voice barely a whisper. Something flickers across Ethan's face. Pain, maybe, or understanding. You were dying in a pig pen, he says quietly. Your husband was killing you slowly. Would you prefer I had left you there? It's a fair question. Hester doesn't have an answer. The vehicle turns down a private road, and she sees a hospital complex ahead. Expensive, exclusive, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions as long as the money's good. What happens now? She asks. Now you heal, Ethan says. You deliver your baby safely. You recover your strength. And then he meets her eyes, and she sees something there that terrifies her more than her husband's cruelty ever did. Because her husband's violence was random, chaotic, controllable if she could just figure out the right behavior. But this is calculated, strategic, the kind of control that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. And then we talk about what comes next, Ethan says. But that's a conversation for when you're strong enough to have it. The vehicle stops. Medical staff are already waiting, clearly briefed on the situation. They converge on the vehicle with practiced efficiency. As they prepare to move her, Hester's eyes land on something outside the window. Her husband. He's there, held between two of Ethan's men, his hands bound behind his back. His face is bruised. His expensive shirt is torn. His eyes, when they meet hers through the glass, are wild with panic. For the first time in a year, she sees fear in them. He's saying something, mouth moving frantically, but she can't hear the words through the glass. Ethan follows her gaze and his expression goes cold. Would you like me to bring him to you? He asks. So you can speak to him before they take you inside? Hester considers this. There are things she could say, accusations she could hurl, pain she could try to inflict with words since she was never allowed to inflict it any other way. But looking at him now, small, scared, stripped of the power he stole from her, she realizes something. She doesn't want to speak to him. She doesn't want to curse him or forgive him or explain how much he hurt her. She doesn't want to give him any more of her words, her time, her emotional energy. She wants him to be irrelevant. No, she says simply. Ethan nods once, sharp and approving. He makes a gesture and the men drag her husband away, out of sight. She doesn't watch where they take him, doesn't ask what will happen to him. Some part of her knows. Some part of her can guess what men like her father do to men who damage things they consider theirs. She should feel something about that. Guilt, maybe, or vengeful satisfaction. Instead, she just feels tired. The medical team lifts her stretcher from the vehicle, and in the chaos of movement, Hester's hand shoots out and grabs the arm of one of the medics. The young woman stops, startled. My baby, Hester says, her voice cracking. I don't care what happens to me. Just please, save my baby. The medic's expression softens. She covers Hester's hand with her own. We're going to save you both, she promises. I swear it. Hester wants to believe her, wants to trust that the worst is over, that she's genuinely safe now, that the nightmare has ended. But as they wheel her through the hospital doors, Ethan walking beside her stretcher with the bearing of a man who owns the building, Hester can't shake the feeling that she's traded one cage for another. This one is cleaner, more comfortable, lined with expensive linens instead of mud. But a cage is still a cage, and she's still trying to figure out if she has the strength to find the door. The room is white. Everything is white. White walls, white sheets, white light filtering through gauzy curtains that billow gently in the air conditioning. Hester wakes slowly, surfacing from medicated sleep like someone climbing out of deep water. For a moment, she doesn't know where she is. Then the beeping starts to make sense. Monitors, medical equipment, the 4-line taped to her arm, the distant sound of footsteps in a hallway. Hospital. Her hand goes immediately to her belly, and relief floods through her when she feels the familiar swell, the subtle shift of movement inside. Still there, still alive. The baby is stable, a nurse had told her at some point. Or maybe a doctor. The last 48 hours are a blur of examinations. Fluids, antibiotics pumped into her veins to fight the infection that had been slowly killing her. She remembers fragments. Ultrasound gel cold on her skin. Someone saying the baby was measuring small but viable. The word miracle spoken more than once. She tries to sit up and her body protests. Every muscle aches. Her head swims. She's clean, though. Someone bathed her while she was unconscious or too drugged to remember. Her hair is washed, braided, lying over her shoulder in a thick plait. She's wearing a hospital gown that's soft against her skin. Expensive, not the scratchy institutional kind. The room itself is enormous. Private. There's a sofa, a television, flowers on the windowsill. It looks more like a hotel suite than a hospital room. And there, sitting in a chair by the window, dressed in a different suit but with the same air of controlled authority, is Ethan Sang. Her father. The words still feel foreign, like trying on clothes that don't quite fit. He notices she's awake but doesn't move immediately, just watches her with an expression she can't read. Finally, he stands and approaches the bed slowly, like she might bolt if he moves too quickly. "How do you feel?" he asks. Hester considers the question. Physically, broken. Emotionally, shattered. Spiritually, she's not sure she has enough pieces left to assemble an answer. "Tired," she says instead. He nods, accepts this. "The doctors say you'll need at least 2 weeks here, maybe 3. The baby is holding on, but you're severely malnourished. Dehydrated. The infection was advanced. Another few days and..." He stops himself. "But you're stable now." Stable. The word tastes like ash. "Where am I?" she asks. "Nairobi. Private wing of Metropolitan Hospital. The entire floor is secured. Secured. Not safe secured. As if she's valuable cargo that needs protecting. Or controlling. Through the window, she can see the city sprawling below. She's high up. 10th floor, maybe higher. Too high to jump if it came to that. Not that she could, in her condition. Not that she would, with the baby to think about. Always the baby. Her only tether to choosing life over the void. Ethan returns to his chair, maintaining distance. Giving her space, or at least the illusion of it. "I've had the marriage annulled," he says, his tone businesslike. "Legally, it no longer exists. The documentation has been erased from public record." Hester processes this. "Can you do that?" A slight smile touches his mouth, humorless. "I can do many things." Of course he can. Men like him reshape reality to suit their needs. "I've also arranged for housing," he continues. "Security. Medical care for you and the child. Education when you're ready. Financial support through a trust. You won't want for anything." It sounds perfect. Generous. The kind of rescue every woman in her position dreams about. But Hester has learned to listen for what's not being said. "What do I owe you?" she asks quietly. The question lands between them like a stone in still water. Ethan leans back in his chair, studying her. There's something in his eyes, respect maybe, or recognition that she's smarter than he'd hoped, or feared. "Your presence," he says finally. "Your name. A place in the family. There it is. The cost. I'm your only daughter." He continues, and now his voice carries weight. "History. Things unspoken. I had you hidden for years. Your mother took you when you were 7 and disappeared so completely it took me nearly 2 decades to find even a trace of you. She did it because being associated with me meant danger. Rival families would have used you as leverage. Still would, if they knew you existed." Hester listens, her heart pounding. "Your marriage." He pauses, jaw tightening. "We're still investigating whether it was random misfortune or if someone placed him in your path deliberately. Either as a trap or because you were running from something and he seemed like shelter." The room feels smaller suddenly, the white walls pressing in. "I don't want to be found," Hester says. "By anyone. I spent 3 years trying to be invisible. And look where that got you." The words are harsh, but his tone isn't cruel. Just factual. "Everything you and the child will need is yours," Ethan says. "Protection. Resources. A name that carries weight. No one will ever touch you again. Because I'll belong to you instead." He doesn't deny it. Hester's hands twist in the white sheets. She thinks about the pig pen, the mud, the suffocating feeling of being owned by a man who saw her as property. And now here's another man, offering her a different cage. Cleaner, more comfortable, but still bounded by walls she didn't choose. What about him? she asks, her voice carefully neutral. Ethan knows exactly who she means. He's alive, he says flatly. Barely. Hester should feel something. Relief, maybe. Or guilt. Or that dark satisfaction that comes from knowing someone who hurt you has finally been hurt back. Instead, she feels nothing. Empty. Like that part of her that could care about his suffering or his fate has been burned away. He'll never touch you again, Ethan adds. I promise you that. Where is he? Does it matter? Hester considers this. Does it? Will knowing he's in a hospital or a prison or a shallow grave somewhere change anything? Will it undo the damage? Will it make her whole? No, she says finally. It doesn't matter. Ethan nods, satisfied. The marriage is dissolved. Legally, you were never his wife. The documentation shows you as Hester Sang, my daughter, married briefly to a man who has now disappeared from public record. Disappeared. The word does so much work. You erased him, Hester says. I corrected a mistake. The distinction might matter to him. To Hester, it just confirms what she already suspected. Her father doesn't solve problems. He eliminates them. She looks at him properly now. This man who shares her blood, her face, her history. This stranger who has orchestrated her rescue but frames it as reclamation. I don't want to be seen, she says quietly, but firmly. I don't want to be part of your world. I don't want people knowing who I am or who you are to me. I want to disappear. Ethan's expression hardens. You think you can survive alone? With a child? In a world that eats women like you alive? I survived in a pig pen, Hester says, and her voice doesn't shake. I can survive anywhere. The words hang between them. A challenge. A declaration. Ethan studies her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiles. It's small, almost invisible, but it's there. You have your mother's stubbornness, he says. Good. They sit in silence. Two people bound by blood and history but separated by everything else. Finally, Ethan leans forward, elbows on his knees, and when he speaks again, his voice has changed. Less authority, more negotiation. What do you want? He asks. Hester has spent so long not being allowed to want anything that the question feels like a trap. But she forces herself to think, to imagine, to reach for something beyond mere survival. The Sang name, she says slowly, working it out as she speaks, for legal protection. So no one will touch me or my child. But that's all. I don't want involvement in your business. I don't want to be seen at your side. I don't want to be used as a symbol or a piece in whatever game you're playing. Ethan listens without interrupting. Education, she continues. Medical care. Funded through a trust, not direct payments I'd have to beg for. No strings attached. No leverage you can hold over me. Agreed. And I'll see you once a year, Hester says. One meeting. That's all you get. You can know I'm alive. Know your grandchild is healthy. But after that, I choose my own life. Ethan sits back, considering. She can see him calculating, weighing costs and benefits, deciding if this is acceptable or if he'll push for more. Finally, he nods. I don't need your loyalty, he says. I just need to know you're alive. It's not freedom. Not really. But it's closer than she's been in years. One more thing, Hester says. My child never knows about any of this. Not the pig pen. Not what happened. Not your world. Not until they're old enough to choose whether they want that knowledge. Fair enough. They shake on it. His hand engulfs hers, warm and solid and carrying the weight of promises that might be kept or might be broken, depending on circumstances she can't predict. But for now, it's enough. The weeks pass in a blur of medical care and cautious healing. Hester's body slowly remembers what it's like to be fed, to be clean, to be treated with basic human dignity. The baby grows stronger. The doctors become cautiously optimistic. Ethan visits once more before she's discharged. He brings paperwork, the trust documents, legal protection orders, proof that she's been erased from her husband's life as completely as he's been erased from public record. He also brings a key. Apartment in Kilimani, he says. Modest. Safe. Yours. Hester takes the key. It's warm from his pocket. Thank you, she says, and means it, even though she knows thanks aren't really what this is about. He nods once, stands and pauses at the door. Your mother would be proud of you, he says quietly, for surviving, for fighting back. Then he's gone, and Hester is left alone with the key and the strange, fragile feeling of having negotiated her own terms for once. 3 months later, Hester stands in a modest apartment in Kilimani, sunlight streaming through windows she can open whenever she wants. The space is small but hers, paid for but not controlled. She has a bank account with money she didn't have to beg for. She has groceries in her fridge. She has locks on her doors that only she has keys to. And in her arms, wrapped in a soft yellow blanket, she has her daughter. The baby is small, born at 36 weeks, underweight but healthy, with a crown of dark hair and eyes that haven't decided their color yet. She makes small sounds, her tiny fist wrapped around Hester's finger with surprising strength. A nurse had come to check on them earlier, the same one who'd been present at the birth. Kind woman, gentle hands. She'd helped Hester through the final terrifying hours of labor, and now she's helping with the paperwork. Name for the birth certificate? The nurse asks, pen poised. Hester looks down at her daughter, this tiny person who fought so hard to survive, who held on through malnutrition and infection and circumstances that should have killed them both. She thinks about her father's name, heavy with history and violence. She thinks about her husband's name, which she can barely remember now and wouldn't give her child even if she could. And she thinks about her mother, the woman who gave up everything to protect her, who fled with nothing but her daughter and her determination, who kept secrets that must have eaten her alive from the inside, who loved Hester completely, without condition, even when loving her meant a life of looking over her shoulder. Grace, Hester says softly. Her name is Grace. The nurse writes it down. Grace sang. No middle name, no father listed. Just Grace. A fresh start. A clean page. A chance to be someone new. Hester lifts the baby to her shoulder, breathes in that impossible newborn smell, and feels her lips curve into something she hasn't felt in so long she almost doesn't recognize it. A smile. Real. Unforced. Hers. Hello, Grace, she whispers. Welcome to our life. It's going to be different than mine was. I promise you that. You're going to know you're loved. You're going to know you're safe. And you're never, ever going to inherit my silence. The baby makes a small sound. Agreement maybe, or just gas, and Hester laughs. Actually laughs. The sound feels rusty, unpracticed but genuine. Outside, Nairobi hums with life. Inside, Hester sang. Survivor, mother, woman who negotiated her own terms, begins the slow work of becoming whole again. It won't be easy. The trauma doesn't just evaporate. The nightmares still come. Some days she can barely get out of bed. But she's free. Or at least she's free.